Hope that you find this a safe place, especially since the weather outside is not so fun. I was thinking that, at least in my experience, music is a universal language. But healing and trying to be healed is also a universal experience. And I think that where those two connect, I think we are all better people when we realize how we do that effectively. And I am very proud to say that Erik Lawrence is an expert in all of the above. I'm proud that he is my brother, my baby brother. and I get to be oldest about some things in life, and that's it. But I'm very proud to introduce you to him and let him take over. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jana, Rabbi Jana. I have some other names for her that, you know, are all nice. They're all nice. I want to thank all of you for coming out. I really appreciate your interest in this subject or something like that. And just say that I was very, very fortunate to grow up in a family where a lot of people were talented, and I was always, in my mind, still the least talented person in my family. Although my mom might think it was her, but you know, I had 3 other siblings. Your rabbi being one of the oldest, and then 2 younger ones, and they were all able to just pick up any instrument and play it, figure out any song, the chords. And our father was an extraordinary jazz saxophone player in New York. And at least for the older of us, he had this tiny little, it looked like a miniature saxophone. It's curved, but basically when you turned 5 years old, he would pull out the saxophone and teach you the basics of the sax. It was like riding a bike or playing ball or something like that. And he'd teach you the basics, and then he'd say, okay, now go ahead and play what you feel. And that has sort of become, you know, the cornerstone of what's happened in my life, because as I got older, a really wonderful thing happened for me. My younger brother, Scott, who's about 2.5 years younger, was so amazingly talented that he could play trumpet like Wynton Marsalis, and he could pick up a bass and play like Marcus Miller, and sit down at the piano and play anything that he heard. Move it around in keys. I don't know if you're a musician, you know, you realize how remarkable that is. And I was really proud of him, but the other side of that pride is I didn't want my younger brother to be better than me. So I would just practice really, really hard. And the fact that everybody was so naturally talented, I kept waiting for that to descend upon me, and it never really did. But I was surrounded by all this musicality, and was aware of what it was that it took to be a good musician. So since what I needed to learn came so naturally to my father and my siblings, they didn't really know how to teach it to me. So I was kind of stubborn, being the tourist in the family. So I taught it to myself. It was important to me, so I did. I got serious about it in my early years in high school, and I practiced a lot, you know. So it's always funny to me when people say, "You're so talented and you're so gifted," and I think, well, what about those 10,000 hours, you know, that which I got done with, you know, very early in my high school years. And my mom can attest to the fact that, you know, I'd be practicing John Coltrane in my room, and right 3 feet away, my brother in his room would be practicing, you know, out of the trumpet Arbin book, and it was enough cacophony to drive anybody mad, you know. So, you know, I think she's pretty good considering. But one of the things is, you know, the kind of thing that a teenager goes through, just any teenager, whatever is going on in their lives, like it's hard to explain and it's hard to cope with. And I think that the thing that I really got into was just picking up my saxophone and playing very, very long tones. And I did it a lot. I did it for hours a day. And then just really simple scales, not even knowing how to use them, but knowing that I would need them someday. And but it was those long tones that I always came back to. And because of those long tones that, I'm 57 now, so we're talking about more than 40 years ago. That's the reason that I have a sound, a personal sound, and I'm able to be expressive on my instrument now. And for those of you who are not musicians or are not planning on being musicians, this is pertinent to my path to sound healing, or sound and vibrational healing practitioner that I am. It's hard to call yourself a healer because then you have to promise that you're going to heal people, and nobody could ever do that. But I have some great stories that are true. So at any rate, the sound just stuck with me, and as a result of that sound, I would go out and boldly ask if I could sit in with people when I was a teenager, and they would say yes because they heard my sound, and they thought I had something that was worth nurturing. And I always appreciated every single person who ever hired me when I was basically terrible, and gave me a chance to grow, and was willing to have their music not sound as good as possible because they knew that someday, I wouldn't let them down. And I take every opportunity to play to make sure that I don't let people down now, because I've done the work and I see other people doing the work. And it's another reason why I have been a teacher for so long. I started teaching college when I was 18 years old, and I've done it on and off. And I've been artist in residence at Dartmouth and taught at Williams College for 9 years and a lot of other reputable places. Nobody's fired me. I've just decided to move on sometimes because I've moved away or because my career was taking off in a different direction. But I think teaching is really important. It's very difficult to make a living these days as a musician. A lot of the streams of income have been taken away by Spotify and Pandora and other what we as musicians consider entitlements. And, but we do it because we love to do it. We do it because we need to do it. We do it because the world without music would be a very, very sad and quiet place. And I appreciate everybody who puts their heart into music, whether it's listening or playing or, let's say, music therapy, So now I want to talk about, by the way, I don't have any notes here. I'm an improviser by nature. I play what I feel. So my sister and I were involved in NIFTY in high school, and a good friend of ours, who's one of the song leaders, is now a top music therapist in the world, like somebody with a whole bunch of letters after her name. And she runs the Louis Armstrong Center for Music and Medicine in New York City, which is the top music therapy center in the world. And she goes all over the world and trains other hospitals to have music therapy centers. Right now she's in Greece. And before that, she goes all over Asia, all over Europe, everywhere. And I'm fortunate enough to be on the steering committee. It's basically the board of directors. And she invited me on because of my music career, but it really turned me on to the idea of how people are actually healing people with patients with music, and they're doing integrated things. So just to give you some examples of what they do, has anybody ever experienced music therapy? Okay, yeah. So to give you an example of what they do is they will come in with a guitar or a drum, and they'll work with patients who are stressed out, who they don't want to give sedatives to, and they find that or they'll bring music, live music or recorded music, into the intensive care units or into NICU, which is for prenatal babies in distress, or end-of-life care. in each of these situations, the music calms people down. It brings their pulse down. There are people who use what we call music therapy entrainment, where we can use music and gradually slow it down so that it brings your pulse to the point where they can perform an operation without giving you any anesthesia. And which sounds crazy to me. And when I heard about it, it sounded crazy. Even now, when I say it, it sounds a little crazy. But I have a friend who's a music therapist, same generation as our friend Joanne. And he's got this sort of amazing innate sense about it. He could be standing here like I am, and then all of a sudden he'll look at somebody and say, I know what you're thinking. Stop talking and come over here and help me with my shoulder, which is in so much pain. And he has self-administered music therapy entrainment for 3 separate root canals, which it had to work the first time in order to actually get to the second time. But he's got this down, you know. It's like I always say that, you know, tapioca pudding, somebody told me it's a root, you know, a starch from a root, that when it's cooked once, it's poisonous. How did they ever get to the second time of cooking it? So anyway, that wasn't true with his first root canal worked out better. So I got really interested through them, and as a result, being a board member, I would go to a lot of symposiums that they would have on pain or cancer treatment or working with children, and it fascinated me. And being later in life and music therapy not being the kind of subject that people get scholarships to, I decided that I was going to study it on my own. And I knew people who were doing things like sound baths. Has anybody ever been to a sound bath? Oh, good. Nobody. That's great. So, has anybody ever taken, what do they call it? Yoga Nidra? Do you know this? You know, so it's sort of like a meditative form of yoga, you know. So, you know, there's activity, but it's not really physically taxing, you know, or sometimes, what do they call it? I can't think of it right now, but they'll use music to help you to either relax or to motivate. Does anybody go to the gym? Okay, do you listen to music when you're exercising or jog, right? So, okay, this is a way that you're using music as entrainment. Entrainment means it's something that's getting you to do something that you're not quite sure you can actually complete or do to that extent. So I started playing at yoga classes. I'd play flute, and I'd watch the people doing their yoga stuff and their kriyas, and I would think, well, if I play and I watch the way that they breathe and I accentuate that breathing, and then I put a little bit of life to that breath through notes, let's see what happens. And what would happen is they'd be able to move for longer, and they'd be able to hold positions for longer, and they'd be able to do all these things for longer. And I thought, well, we're really onto something. And then I started playing with people who were playing with these giant crystal bowls, and which are pitched. And this has become a huge multi-million-dollar industry. Has anybody experienced the crystal bowl thing? Yeah. So I have a friend who does similar work to what I do, and he was living in Mill Valley, California, north of San Francisco. And there was a laboratory up there that was doing some sort of a centrifuge experiment, and they were using pulverized 99.99% pure quartz crystals. And the byproduct of that centrifuge would create a quartz crystal bowl, and they would toss them in the garbage. And he and his friends would start jumping into the dumpsters and pulling these things out because they thought they were cool musical instruments, and realizing that that playing these things for hours is actually better than the drugs that they were taking back in those days. So, so that's another way that we discover things sometimes. So now he's got hundreds of these bowls, and he's really mellow. So so as I started studying, I thought, well, I really want to see what I can do, because as you get, I have this great quote here from one of my heroes, Sonny Rollins, is a great, one of the greatest living jazz musicians, and Sonny Rollins, and he says, trust that later on in life, there's something bigger for you when you serve others. And this is something that Dizzy Gillespie, the great jazz trumpet player, always used to say. He was a member of the Baha'i faith, which is, believe it or not, one of the top, the 5 largest religions in the world. We just don't really know it here in the United States. But it came out of the Judeo-Christian Middle East in the mid-1800s, where a very charismatic leader started giving these teachings, much like Jesus, and influenced a lot of people to the point where he was threatening the nation's leaders, and they put him away. So, was he a crazy man? Was he a holy man? We can't judge, but there are a lot of people who follow his teachings. Very theistic, very God-centered, and very much following the doctrines of Judaism and Christianity. Somebody's phone is going off, by the way. I'm hoping it's not mine. Nope. So Dizzy would always say, he was, a lot of people ridiculed him, like Louis Armstrong, for being this is the jazz history teacher in me coming out, for being sort of a clown and being more of a performer than he was an artist. But the truth is that they were 2 of the greatest innovators of all times, and they just happened to be happy and wanted to make people laugh and smile when they created music. So he would always say, he put his hands out and say, bless you. He would say, bless you. And he would say, you just always remember that you're serving people. You're not supposed to have people turn around and walk away scratching their heads. So that led me to think, given the obscure nature of the art that these amazing modern artists in the 20th century were creating, like Dizzy Gillespie and Louis Armstrong, how did they figure out how to make it so that it was so universal? And if I can do that with the spiritual music that I've come to play in my life, what an incredible experience that would be. And I've had some wonderful experiences as a performer. Probably most notably, I played for 10 or 12 years with Lee Von Helm from the band. And during his whole last stretch, where he had lost his voice to cancer and he got his voice back miraculously, and I mean, it really seemed like a miracle, because the way that you make a sound with your voice is you have 2 vocal cords, and the bottom of them vibrate against each other, from what I understand. And his were destroyed by the radiation treatments that he got. He got a tremendous number in a short period of time, and they were just unusable. But he would do gigs on the drums to keep from killing himself, probably, or shooting himself again, because he accidentally shot himself one time practicing for a role in a movie, and he shot himself in the knee, and somehow the way he plays drums, he sings the song in his head, and that's how he keeps track of how he wants the song to go. And he was a very unique drummer. And one day he was doing that, and he found that there was a voice that was actually vibrating in his head. And he said, and I was on stage with him, and he said, let's do this song. And don't you tell Henry. And we did it, and he pulled up the microphone, and he sang the song. And the musicians' knees buckled, and everybody in the audience were crying, and everybody in the band were crying. And he got an 8-minute standing ovation. Nobody wanted to do anything after that, So they took him to doctors, and doctors said, well, we don't know how you did it, but you trained the top half of your vocal cords to vibrate to make a sound. It wasn't exactly the same voice that sang Take a Load Off Annie or Up on Cripple Creek, but it was him behind that voice, and that hadn't changed. And it was amazing. And then came all the TV shows and all the tours and all the Grammys and all that stuff. And I was just paying attention. So another big lesson for me was this guy who had this amazing ability to know exactly where his drums should go in the room when he walked into the room, how to tune them and exactly how hard to hit them so that they sounded beautiful. And he knew how to do that with his voice and with his mandolin and with every instrument that he played. And it was like a gift because he couldn't necessarily explain all the theory behind everything that he was a master of, but he did it and he showed everybody. And there would be times where we'd be on stage in front of 14,000 people, and he'd get up from behind the drums and run over to the horn section and say, no, no, no. Like, who is that guy? Yosemite Sam. No, 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 not that. Don't play all those notes. Sounds like jazz. And we'd be like, you're right. You're right. And he was an amazing teacher, you know, a Zen master. And I was noticing how he put his sound in the room is very similar to the way that I have always paid attention to how my sound sounded in a room, whether it was in my bedroom when I was a teenager and I was practicing my long tones, which I now realize was I was creating a force field to heal myself and to uplift myself and to connect with something spiritually, or whether I was on any stage in any place that I've ever played. At this point, I think I counted 27 countries and 41 states. And, you know, and in that I say I've been really, really fortunate. And I don't really like talking about myself. It's just that I'm up here. And you guys came to hear about me, so I can do it. I'd rather just sit silently with all of you guys. Then I started thinking about that sound, and I started thinking about, okay, what can I do with my sound beyond what I do right now? And I was with people who were doing sound baths and who were working with people with tuning forks. And I had a really good friend who had heard about these tuning forks. You know what these things are, right? That make a sound, right? And it's actually more than one sound. The truth of the matter is, it's very hard to create something that just makes one note. Everything has overtones. And in the upper partials of the overtones is where the healing happens. And my friend who was working with tuning forks would tell me these stories. She was my girlfriend at the time. And she'd tell me these stories and say, yeah, I had this woman come to me who flew all the way from California. She was a newscaster. She's been trying to get pregnant for years, and she can't do it. She's tried everything. She spent tens of thousands of dollars. And I worked with her on her second chakra, and a month later she got pregnant. You know, can we now open up, you know, a store and say, come and get pregnant here? You know, no, you can't, but it worked. And then another guy came to her, his daughter brought him. He had had a stroke. He was paralyzed on his right side for 14 months, and his hand was like this, and it was the only thing he could feel on his right side was the pain from his ribs, of his hand pressing into his ribs. And she worked with him with this tuning fork, and for 45 minutes, and his hand was down by his side. So something happened, you know. So I went and I studied with people who there's a theory called guided imagery through music. And there's a brilliant woman named Helen Bonney, B-O-N-N-E, I think it is, a British woman who was a classical music aficionado. She knew everything she ever heard. She remembered it all, every score to every piece of music. And she developed a theory that said, well, music is the most, Western classical music is the most evolved form of music in the world, and that it's beneficial to anybody who listens to it. It doesn't matter where you're from or what's wrong with you. And she would create programs of music, recorded music, that would be, say, 30 minutes long to 60 minutes long, that was programmed specifically for you if you wanted to be more peaceful, if you wanted to become motivated, if you wanted to become, I mean, it was sort of like biorhythms became sort of like that, but she was doing it earlier on. And it's quite interesting and quite effective what she did. But then one of her proteges, it's a woman I studied with, Pat Moffett Cook, who's got a school out in Santa Fe, of course, she said, well, what about music from around the world? You know, what about music from indigenous people? Because since the beginning of civilization, people have used music as part of their religion, and people have used music as part of, the musician were the medicine men. It doesn't matter if you're in, the most remote part of South America or Northern Europe or anywhere. In Africa, they're called griot, Griot. This is the healing class. They were all musicians. Everybody lived in this village was a griot, and they'd go out there into the world or out to other villages, and they would heal people, very often with song. In India, that's true. So I'm going to step back because two people here, before I even opened my mouth, mentioned classical Indian music of different kinds. And I was really fortunate in my house because we listened to Ravi Shankar as often as we listened to Barbra Streisand or, I don't know who else, that we loved, everybody that we love to listen to. We listened to a lot of jazz in my house. When I was about 17 years old, a local high school auditorium, nothing special, Nanuet High School in 15 miles north of New York City, they would have a concert series in our area every summer, and you go from one school to another, one or two Saturdays a month. You'd see the Preservation Hall, you'd see, I don't know who else, Peter, Paul, and Mary, like just a wide variety of things that was culturally kind of interesting. And I went with my one bohemian friend in high school, my friend Carolyn Caruso, who was so cute I was afraid to ask her out, because if she said no, I would have been crushed. And we went to see Ravi Shankar with Ala Raka and a sarod player. And they transformed this typical high school auditorium. The lights were out. There was a large carpet on the floor. There were candles. There was incense burning. And these people played music. I'd listened to him a lot. I mean, I probably a couple hundred hours worth of Ravi Shankar in my ears and in my heart already. And they took us on a journey. They took me someplace that I've never come back from, and that I continue to try to attain, whether I'm playing pop music, rock music, jazz, world music. Fortunately, I play all these things. Oh, I meant to say, I play saxophone, and I play all the saxophones, and I play a lot of flutes, and every instrument that I'll play, I'll only bring out if I think that I can get a really good sound on it, and I think that I can fill the room with sound, so I can vibrate the walls. And yes, we use microphones sometimes. But a lot of this is deep. It goes back generations. It's in our DNA. It goes back to, I don't know where all my family history goes to. A lot of it is Eastern Europe. And I remember as a teenager, in the early days of HBO, watching a movie late on Wednesday nights. They would have foreign films. And this is back in the days where they show the same film like 600 times in a month. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. There's an entire generation of people who know every word to that movie because it's the only thing that played for 3 months on HBO. So I saw this foreign film from Soviet Georgia called The Legend of Surum Fortress. Impossible to follow because they use the same 6 actors for every single role, and they use the same broken down castle for every single scene, for every place they went. And since I didn't really understand the language and I was just reading trying to keep up with the captions, I had no idea what was going on. It was totally surreal. It might have been surreal anyway, but based on that concept, but it was really surreal for me. But the music just cut right through me. And there was something about this traditional music of Far Eastern Soviet Georgia that resonated with me, and it was probably my grandfather's music, and it was probably other people's music that goes back 3-4 generations. And has anybody ever had an experience like that? Yeah? Yeah, I think we all do, like things we just can't explain and maybe don't want to dwell on, but I dwelled on it, a little bit. I created a composition called Something in There that became a suite that became an album, which I've yet to release, which became an entire suite based on phases of sleep and dreaming and what happens in your dreams, because it seemed like dreaming. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard this, but there are scientists now who are saying that if we spend 8 hours a day dreaming, out of 24, it's 1/3 of our lives, or sleeping. I don't sleep that much, but we spend that much time sleeping. It can actually be considered an alternate reality, So to some of that might be to some of us that might be comforting, and some of us it might be a very scary thought, but it's entirely possible. We process a lot in our dreams, and our waking light can't usually keep up with that, So this is where music comes back in, because when we sing or play or dance or listen to music, we can enter into a realm that's in between. That's how people can perform operations without any kind of sedatives or painkillers or anything like that, because you're not actually there, and it's pretty amazing. There's this incredible jazz piano player named Randy Weston. If you've ever seen him, he was 6'9", and he played with Dizzy Gillespie, African American man. I'm not sure where he was from. He died. He was in his 90s. He just died last year, and I was lucky to get to see him. And Dizzy Gillespie brought him. This was a big move for a lot of musicians, because it never really happened before. He brought him with his big band to Africa, and he was so moved by the music of Africa that he dedicated a good deal of the rest of his life to introducing the rest of the world to his knowledge of Africa. And he was a brilliant man who took all of this in. And I remember going to see him at Williams College when I was teaching there, and he brought 2 ensembles from Morocco that played Gnawa music, which is a religious sect of Islam in northwestern Africa that's been playing the same exact music, the same exact way for 1,200 years. And he would say, a number of times when I would see him, he said, music is something that you cannot touch it, but it can touch you. Right? Yeah, it's really good. By the way, I'm going to try to leave some time so you guys can ask questions. But if you like to ask, if you have a burning question and you don't think you're going to remember it, just raise your hand and I'll try to answer it, integrate it into it. Yeah, go on.
I just have one. I'm a little amateur musician myself. I play in a few worship bands and stuff.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask, I heard you played on a few Emmy award-winning.
Grammy Awards, yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's right. Yeah.
Which ones did you play?
Leave on Helm. So,
Oh, my God, the drummer for,
yeah.
he's one of the great.
We could talk about it after, but yeah. That's right. Yeah. I actually mentioned, maybe you weren't here when I mentioned it. Yeah. Those 2 records were called The Ramble at the Ryman and Electric Dirt. Yeah, and I'll be back at the Ryman again in about a month with Little Feat. So, yeah. Yeah, he's pretty special human being. Yeah. So and a lot of people are, and I've had a lot of mentors, some of whom you've heard of, and some of whom I'm sure you haven't. Yeah. Has what been recorded? Gnawa music. Yeah. It's Gnawa, and it's pretty easily found. Yeah, Gnawa. Nawa. Yeah. And those kind of questions, you can just jot them down to ask me afterwards. I'll stick around. Yeah. So let's see. Back. Ravi Shankar. So in India, people. Well, okay. I'm going to talk for a second about my mom. I think a lot of you know Sheila. She's right here. Hi. And her sister I'm not going to talk about you. I'm going to talk about your sister Carol for a second because there are two things that I want to tell you. I'll try to tell them quickly. Number one is she had studied some homeopathic healing. You know, she had studied classical homeopathy, and she had a teacher who was from India. And homeopathy, I don't think it comes from India, but this guy was very serious about it, and he was a master teacher, and he was up in Massachusetts. You should go up there to study with him. And he told this story. You know, homeopathy, it's kind of based on the same idea of vaccinations, where they take a small dose of something and they give it to you, and your body develops antibodies for it. Except in the case of homeopathy, they use an infinitesimal dose. So in other words, they'll put a drop of, say, Lyme disease. They'll take an actual deer tick, grind it into powder, take one granule of the deer tick, put it in 100 drops of water, mix it up, blend it, take one drop of that and put that into 100 drops of water, and do that several times, and then they'll give you that. So it's, are you actually really getting the disease? You know, it's such an infinitesimal dose, but they're saying that they really believe that your body has the ability to detect that foreign thing that's brought into your body, and in such a small amount that that it can build up a defense against it. And it's as you know, it's as successful in its treatment as allopathic medicine, which is what we've, you know, pretty much accepted here. So at any rate, he was telling this story about they're always trying to come up with new remedies based on like direct idea. And one of the radical remedies that he and some of his friends were working on was mother's milk, actual milk from a mother, a lactating mother, and what they would use it for. So they had some mother's milk, and he said, well, I never really got to try it. He said, then one day a young man came in, and I could just tell by what he was talking to me about that his issues were that the perfect remedy for him would be mother's milk. He said, so I administered the remedy to him. And he said, but the problem was that I didn't have the remedy anymore. So what I did was I thought about the remedy, and I touched his arm. And the symptoms started to go away. And what he was trying to say was, he said, someday I'd like to reach a point where I no longer give any remedies to anybody, but I just sing raga, which is traditional Indian singing, for my patients, and that's what heals them. But in India, that's what they do. If you go into a small village in India, there's I've seen videos of it that Pat Moffat-Cook shared with us, of a man who's sitting in a cot with a bunch of women on the floor in front of him, and they're having reproductive issues, and he's singing for them. Somewhere on the other side of the village, there's another raga singer who's a village healer who's singing for some other specific malady, and people would come from all over to be healed by that. So that's one of the ways that, I know it sounds a little crazy to us, but how many people go to church on Sunday or go to synagogue on Friday and sing, right? Okay, so a study has shown that, or sing, how many people sing in a community chorus? How many people have tried group community drumming, right? Okay, so studies have shown that when you walk into choir practice, or you walk into community singing, or you walk into your house of worship, you walk in as an individual. But one of the ways that you become a community, if you sing together for an hour, what happens during that hour? You're breathing together. You're matching tones together. You're harmonizing together. You walk out as a community, but not only do you, and this is proven, you actually all have the same pulse when you're walking out of the room. This is the power of what music can do, okay? So to go back to, my first story about my aunt Carol is this thing about her teacher. It's not about her, but it's a story that she imparted to me. But this is really about her and me. When I started studying taking this course, it was in New York. And I'm a musician, which means I work on the weekends. even sometimes on Friday nights. Yeah, you do. That's true. She does, more than I do on Fridays. And I was actually living in Pittsburgh. I moved around a bit, but I'm from New York. And I was living in Pittsburgh at the time. And I drive to New York, and the only way that I could, and I take off of work, so the only way I could really afford to do this on a regular basis for about a year, like every other Saturday, every other weekend, I go in and spend the whole weekend in New York. Has anybody ever tried to park in New York for 2 hours? Yeah. So I would get there just before 6 o'clock on Friday, and I'd park my car, and I'd leave it there until I drove home on Sunday night or Monday. And I'd take a course, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, all the way through for about a year. And I would sleep on my aunt's very uncomfortable couch in her tiny little apartment, like 200 square feet. And we'd spend a lot of that time not sleeping but talking or having tea or something. It was an amazing kindness, the kind of thing that family or really good friends can do for you. And because there's no other way I could have done this. And I couldn't think of a way I could repay her. I can now, but I couldn't then. And at the end of my course, and also, as you can tell, I'm a very accomplished musician. I played with a lot of people. Somebody mentioned Bob Dylan. I played with Bob Dylan. I played with a lot of famous jazz people. I've played with musicians from all around the world. I've traveled a lot. I don't like talking about myself, but I can. I know myself. When I was taking this course, when they were talking about breathing, I wouldn't say anything about breathing. I'm a professional breather. I play the saxophone. I wouldn't say anything because the more I speak, the less I learn. I already know everything I have to say. So nobody knew who I was. I played with Aretha Franklin during the course of this, like it was a Tuesday, I played with Aretha Franklin, and then I came and did the class on the weekend, and I didn't mention that, everybody was like, how was your week? I was like, oh, it was really great. I was in tears on stage, and the sound is coming out of this woman's mouth, and she's playing the piano, and talk about spirit and healing. I just kept it to myself, not because it was private, but because I didn't think it would serve my learning, which is what I was there for. And then at the end of the course, a couple of the teachers that I really admired a lot, a woman who taught raga singing, and the man who designed these tuning forks, who did all the research on them, they did a recording session with one of the class facilitators, and she knew who I was because her husband was a musician in New York, and it's a very small community, and I'm part of pretty much every part of it. And so she invited me to come and play with them. And there was a guy named Steve Gorn who plays Bansuri flute. He's like the American master of classical Indian flute playing, an incredible improviser. And I went to play with them, and I was really excited because it's two of my favorite teachers and a flute player that I always wanted to hang out with and play with, and and all this. And they're looking at me like, oh, this is Erik. He's like the guy who makes sure that we have tea and that the chairs are set up right. And then I take out my instruments and we start playing, and they're looking at me like, who are you? And because I know I can play, and I can play. And at the end, the tuning fork guy, it was at his studio at his house in upstate New York, up near Woodstock. He runs over to me and he gives me a tuning fork like this, with a little crystal on the bottom of it. And the crystals are used for to amplify the vibration of the you'd strike it and then you'd place it somewhere where you're in pain, physical or emotional, and it would help to relieve that pain from the vibration. And each one is different. Is tuned to a different pitch, a specific pitch, and they're tuned based on the theory of Pythagoras, who was the first great mathematician, and Fibonacci, who figured out the order of how things exist in nature. So these tuning forks are specifically designed to bring you back into balance with nature, your circadian rhythms. And I say this very calmly, but it's kind of an amazing thing. And it works really in amazing ways. My sister will tell you that somebody was sitting in her room. Is she here? Had it. Who's that?
A lot of these people have done, So on Shabbat morning, we do this a lot. It brings you immediate peace when you hit these and put them on both sides, and we've had that. We pass it around a room, and everybody feels a Shabbat Shalom with that. But we have people who have various ailments. We pass this around too, and I'm going to let you show, but you do this. And as he said, I had someone show me once. I had severe pain in my shoulder, and I used this, and it was amazing how fast it disappeared. But we had someone who's epileptic, and she was in severe back pain, and she did that, and it was gone.
Yeah.
It was gone. And
Yeah.
it was, I mean, like that day, it was wonderful.
I played a music meditation, flute meditation, one time at this kind of like a yoga healing studio. This is where you do these sorts of things. And at the end, this one woman who I had like I'm what people call an empath. You know, I feel things from people. And I was feeling something weird about her, you know, like a tension. And everybody at the end of this hour-long meditation was all blissed out and, you know, in a better place. And this one woman was sitting on the couch, and the owner of the place came over to me. She said, Eric, she's got a terrible headache. Do you think you can help her? And I was thinking, well, you're a healer, you know, but actually I can. So I grabbed these two tuning forks, and I walked over to her. And here's a woman with a migraine. And here's this weird guy that she'd never seen before, an hour before, who she feels is responsible for her headache, coming to her and saying, like with these two pieces of metal, like I'm going to do something. And she's like, you know, I need a pill, or I need an adjustment, or I need something, you know. And I just looked at her and calmly, without trying to explain myself, I said, I just need you to trust me for 3 seconds. And I struck the forks and I put them next to her ears, and the headache went away. And I can't say that that's going to happen to everybody, or it's going to happen every time, but it happened that time, and it's happened a lot of times. So that's the kind of thing. This was, honestly, you know, this guy, if you saw him, you know, he looks like, you know, a dentist. He doesn't look like a mystical healer. But the guy who did this work, who created these tuning forks, I thought he was a snake oil salesman. You guys had those down here in the South, right, at medicine shows? But I bought them because my girlfriend was using them, and she had helped the guy who was paralyzed, and she'd helped the woman get pregnant. And I thought, well, you know, this will be sort of like my warm-up to what I really want to do, which I want somebody to tell me it's okay for me to do this, which is being the improviser that I am, and the person who like walks into situations, musical situations, and makes other people's music sound better, figure out what's missing and make it sound better, comes to the emotional point of the music and brings that emotional point out. That's who I am. That's what I do. You know, I'm looking for somebody to give me permission to say, okay, you can create music for people to help them to heal. But nobody can give me that permission because there's nobody who actually does that in the Western tradition of all the teachers that I studied with. You know, so I finished this recording session, and Dr. John Bilyeu, who's a naturopath and who designed these, he used to be head of psychiatry at Bellevue Hospital in New York, and he would work with the male patients with tuning forks, and he's starting to develop his theories about how vibration could really help people. And he gives me a tuning fork, and he says, this is for you, because he liked the way I played. And he felt an instant connection with me that he didn't have before. He had it, but he wasn't sure what it was. And I said, oh, John, you don't have to give that to me. I bought some of your forks. He said, no, this is for you. I took it from him. The next weekend is my last weekend of my course, and I finally decided what I was going to try to do to finish my course and to set my goals on what I wanted to do and how I was going to do it. But I go to my aunt's house, and I tell her this whole great story about playing with my teachers and this guy giving me this tuning fork. And my aunt my mother is a giant compared to my aunt. She's, yeah, you're way taller than her, right? And she's this little woman, and she's listening to me the whole time, which is a feat for her. And I finished talking, and she says, do you think it would work on this? And she points to her throat, and she's got a cyst in her throat the size of an apricot. And 15 years before, she had had throat cancer, and that doctor who wants to sing raga, who administered the healing to that guy, even though he didn't have the remedy anymore, he gave her one remedy. They were about to operate. She didn't want to be operated on, but she had accepted the fact that they were going to have to remove the cancer from her throat. And he gave her one remedy, and when she went back to the doctor 2 weeks later for the operation, they said, "You are Carol, right?" And she said, "Yeah." They're like, "You don't have cancer." And she called her doctor, and she said, "Whatever you gave me, the cancer went away. I can't tell you what it is, and it doesn't really matter because with homeopathic remedies, it's very specific to who you are. You answer 500 questions, and then literally 500 questions, a book like this. If you've ever gone to one, you'd know." And she says, "The cancer went away." He said, "Yeah, I know." He said, "You probably won't ever get it again." But here it is 15 years later, and she got it again. She said, "You think it'll work on this?" And I felt bad because she's tiny, and there's this giant thing in her throat that I didn't notice, And I said, "Honestly, I don't know, but I do know that vibration changes molecular structure." And how do I know this is because there's videos you can watch on YouTube, which we could have done, I suppose, that show the science called Cymatics, 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 that a doctor named it, but it's something that they've known about for hundreds of years. And you can watch a video, and maybe you've seen this, where they have like a tray that has powder on it, and then they vibrate the tray either with a violin bow or with electronic thing, and you can control it to the number of hertz. So if you set it to 128 hertz, that's actually a C, 2 octaves above middle C, excuse me, or 256 hertz is a C just above middle C on a piano. And every time that you set it at a certain vibration level, whether it actually makes a pitch or it just vibrates that much, it creates a geometric pattern on this tray. And then if you change it, it creates another geometric pattern. And if you go back to the original one, it goes back to the original geometric pattern. You can watch these videos on YouTube if you guys know YouTube. And when I watched it, I was like, "Oh, this is kind of a nice parlor trick." And then all of a sudden I thought about it. I was like, they're moving molecules with vibration. It's true. It's possible. In fact, it happens. This is why people like to go to dance clubs or to the symphony, is because they're literally moved by the music. It's something inside of them moves because of the vibration. And so when my aunt asked me if the tuning fork would work, I said, "I honestly don't know, but I do believe, I know that vibration changes molecular structure." Oh, another thing. Anybody have cats? Like cats? Anybody like cats? Here's a reason to like cats. An outdoor cat, is your cat outdoor? Indoor. Okay. So here's a reason to like cats. Outdoor cats are natural-born killers. That's not the reason. They have an instinct that goes beyond killing for food. They'll kill for food. They'll get that out of the way early in the day. And then they'll just kill and maim anything that they can catch. Just because that's what they do. That's still not the reason to like them. Yeah, they'll, take a wing off of a bird just to see what it does to the bird. You know what I mean? It's just like they're evil. They're mean. But at some point in the day, they exert themselves to the point. And if you have a cat, like your cat can all of a sudden jump somewhere, and they're unbelievably fast and agile, but they're mostly sleeping. At some point during the day, every single day, a cat is so exhausted that it needs, and in so much pain. Imagine how much pain you'd be in if you exerted yourself, at Olympic levels, 3/4 of the day, every single day, that they need to heal and restore. And what do? They curl up in a ball and they purr. And they purr between 60 and 85 hertz, I think it is. I have to look it up. But that vibration level completely restores their body back to natural health and heals them every single day. Now they take cats and they put them on people who have tumors, and the tumors go away. Or that's a CAT scan or a lab test. That's an old joke. So, yeah. So Yeah, I mean, it's really incredible what they do. And the other thing is, if you have a cat, you know that if you're feeling blue, if you have a little bit of heartache, the cat will just come and sit on your chest, right? And it's healing you. That's part of the instinct part of the cat too. It feels that. It knows your fear. It knows your sadness. It knows your happiness. It knows all that stuff. I personally like dogs a lot better, but for other reasons, you know. But that's the amazing thing about cats. So anyway, back to my aunt. And I don't know where we are in time. Oh, it's almost 7 o'clock. I give her the tuning fork. I said, listen, I'm going to be busy all weekend, and I have other tuning forks. Why don't you just take this? You're going to be home all weekend. And just anytime you think of it, here's what you do. You strike it. I hit it against my knee usually, or on the couch or something like that. And you put it right on the spot, right there. And she was working at her desk all weekend, you know. So this is like 9:30 on Friday night. The next day I go off to class. I come back about 6:30. I get a slice of pizza for $1 on the way back from her place, because in New York you can get a really good slice of pizza for $1. And then I come back and we start chatting like we do. And she says, hey, guess what? And I said, what? She says, look, the cyst is gone. Less than 24 hours. I didn't do it. She did it herself. I gave her enough belief. But yet, Pat Moffat-Cook, the woman who told me about the raga singing and all that other stuff, she says, the one who adapted guided imagery from classical music to world music, she says that good healing with good intention and good background and good knowledge can bypass a person's belief system. You don't have to believe me that I can help you, but I can help you. You might not ever even notice it or acknowledge it, but I'm putting it out there towards you. You know, that's my gift, is that I get to send out something with love to everybody that I create music for. And it's an amazing gift, and I'm grateful for it every day. And you know, the thing about music is, I don't know what any of you do, but every morning I wake up humbled by music and what I have to do, the work that I need to do today. And every night I go to sleep humbled by what I didn't get done, you know, by where it took me and what it taught me. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of amazed that I won 2 Grammys, you know, that I was part of an ensemble and helped to build that ensemble and hired the musicians and, you know, helped to create the coalescence so that we could have the kind of music that bring Levon's vision to life. But I don't feel like, oh, you know what, I'm humbled because Stevie Wonder has 8 Grammys and I have 2 Grammys. You know, I don't care about that, you know. But I'm humbled by the greatness of what other people can do with music, and I'm humbled by the lessons I learn about what's been done, what my music therapist friends do, you know, which is different from being a sound healer, you know, all of that kind of stuff. I just wanted to give you a couple of quotes. Is there anything here that you wanted to read? No? Okay. So John Coltrane is sort of like one of the greatest musicians jazz has ever created. He started out in South Carolina. He came up through the ranks, played with Miles Davis, you know, played with Thelonious Monk. These are all big names in jazz in the 50s. And he took the path that musicians took, especially after Charlie Parker. He became a heroin addict, you know, and then something changed in him. He was good and he was unique, and he was playing in a way that was slightly different from anybody else who had played before him. And he was obviously brilliant. And a lot of those musicians who are casualties were brilliant but didn't, you know, aren't still alive today, like Sonny Rollins is alive, and he's not a casualty. He's a casualty to age, but we all sort of succumb to that at some point, don't we? But he has nothing to prove. He's already done 1,000 times more than most great musicians will ever do. So John Coltrane all of a sudden replaced his drugs, which is a gateway to another consciousness. Not a healthy one, but it is a gateway to another consciousness, a way to move out of the life that a black man from the South was living in the 1950s, who was probably, you know, one of the great musical geniuses of his time, but wasn't getting treated like Pablo Casals was getting treated, you know, or Leonard Bernstein. But he had a lot of he did have a lot of success. But even still, Miles Davis would get pulled out of his Lamborghini by the cops and beat up because they figured he had to be a drug dealer, not a genius of music. You know, so this is the life that they were living. And John Coltrane moved towards a more spiritual nature. He started studying Indian music. He started studying any type of music, that African music, music that went back to a deeper culture. Not primitive. That music's not primitive. African music and Indian music are not primitive. In fact, it's so advanced that we can only just barely begin to understand it. Native American music, same thing is true. It's taking nothing against Western European classical music or rock and roll, but I'm just telling you from my life as a student, as a humble student of music, these older types of music go way deeper, and that's one of the reasons that they reach us. So he became incredibly spiritual, and as he went on in his life, and he still he accomplished so much that he advanced music, I would say, in the last 10 years of his life, from 1957 to 1967, maybe 100 years or more. We're still coming to terms with what he brought into the music and what he integrated from other musical cultures. And I don't think that there's anybody who's played music that's more advanced than him, and he died over 50 years ago. So, I mean, there are innovators, but he took it really far. And what he taught people like me, and I was only 6 when he died, was to go as far as you can with your own individual voice. And, you know, here's a few ideas, you know, to get you started. So here's a couple of quotes from him that I'd love to share with you. Excuse me. There is never any end. There are always new sounds to imagine, new feelings to get at. And always, there's the need to keep purifying these feelings and sounds so that we can really see what we've discovered in its pure state. So that we can see more and more clearly what they are, what we are. In that way, we can give to those who listen the essence, the best of what we are. But to do that at each stage, we have to keep on cleaning the mirror. We have to look at ourselves with humility. My music is the spiritual expression of what I am, my faith, my knowledge, my being. When you begin to see the possibilities of music, you desire to do something good for people, really good. To help humanity free itself from its hang-ups, I want to speak to their souls. That was my inspiration when I really started getting serious about music. You know, unfortunately, I had parents who encouraged me. I had brothers and sisters who egged me on because they were so talented. I had amazing opportunities. And, you know, it's great because I lived during a time where I'm glad I'm as old as I am. I'm almost 60 years old, you know, a couple of years. I'm not pushing it, but you know, I got to see everybody play, you know, not everybody, but, you know, I got to see Duke Ellington. I got to see Count Basie, Sarah Vaughan. I got to even play with some of these. I played with a trombone player who was Louis Armstrong's trombone player when I was a teenager, you know, and I played with Arthur Prysock one time, and Bob Dylan and Elvis Costello and, you know, lots of other people, but also a lot of people you've never heard of who are also some of my heroes, you know. And I'm really lucky that that I show up as somebody who is aware enough and cares enough that if I'm here to help you with some issues in a healing capacity, whether you're in the audience or whether you know we're one-on-one or it's a small group and I'm playing a meditation for you, or whether I'm playing in your band, you feel comfortable to share with me what it is that I need to know so I can do my job. And one of the reasons I feel like I'm really lucky as a musician is that who's become deeper and deeper is that sound healing as a modality is the highest thing that a musician can achieve. That's what John Coltrane was talking about 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, and that's what I am lucky to get to do. And sometimes it's in a bar playing the blues, and sometimes it's in a sanctuary, and sometimes it's on stage in front of 60,000 people or on TV. You know, I remember playing at a political convention, and it wasn't the party that I am part of. It was the other party, and they were deciding who they wanted to become president, and he did become president. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to do this because money is money, and it's my country too. And every time that I play, I'm going to send a subliminal message to those people, you know, to maybe make them, you know, better people based on my value system, you know, that which is just mine, you know. Anyway, yeah, do you want to play? Okay. Is it right? I'll play for you a little bit, or do you want to ask a couple questions, then I'll play for you a little bit? Anybody have questions that are burning? Play? Okay. All right, I spoke enough. Okay. Well, I'm going to start with, do you want to do something with me? Yeah? I'm going to start with a little bit of flute meditation, then I'll play something with the saxophone, if that's okay with you. And I'm going to ask my sister, and you know, we might be touching upon this tomorrow evening too, during the Friday night Shabbat services, which are 6 o'clock. Free of charge, no cover charge. No drink minimum. Oh, where did what happened there? But anyway, and that we're doing tomorrow, right? Yeah, but I'll be back here tomorrow. I'll be here all week. And so I'm going to play flute here. And, oh, you use that one. I'll use this one. Turn it on. Check, check, check. Okay.
Imagination. Is one of the primary forces of the neshama, soul. It functions within the realm of the nigun, the melody. the capacity to open new well springs. Beyond the limitations of intelligence. For the nigun is grasped within one's heart. The heart surely is capable of a fuller and more sublime understanding than one's brain.
That text was taken from teachings that we just found, and I'm not, you know, I think a lot about words, and of course about things that can't be expressed in words, like music, and I think a lot about the difference between the word cognition, which is knowing something, and recognition, which is hearing something that you already know, that somehow already know. And when you read a text, like I did, we found these just today, this afternoon, and this is about Kabbalah, about how music and mysticism, about music and mysticism in Kabbalah, and which is not something that I'm in any way a scholar about. I don't know that much about it, but I was trying to tie this all in, and if we were lucky enough, I have a friend who lives here in Shreveport, who is, I consider one of the top John Coltrane scholars, who wrote a book about him in 1976. And we were going to try to tie in the music part and the Jewish mysticism part in this marvelous impromptu symphony of words and music. And we didn't get a chance to do it because he had an emergency in his family. But the words that we found here and that my rabbi sister chose to read, excuse me, are so powerfully true to me, even though I've never heard them or read them before, you know? And hopefully they resonate for you as well. And I don't use that word resonate lightly, it's my profession. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to play a little bit for you on the saxophone. I'll play something different, something a little jazzier. Oh, yes. Yes, I have. Yeah, and it's interesting because when I do private sound healing work with people, I create music for them. That's the thing that I was looking for permission to do. But I've listened to music from so many different cultures that even though I haven't necessarily studied them to say, I can sit down and jam with, you know, Ravi Shankar disciples in Indian raga, I understand the essence of a lot of different musical styles. It cuts through. There are no shortcuts in music. The only shortcut is knowing what it is you need to work on. And I say this as a teacher. The woman that I was talking about before, the dancer, did I mention her? There's a woman I was working with, and she had stage, I was talking to before, she had stage 4 cancer. One of my first patients, she had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I'd known her for years. She was in her 40s, and by the time I saw her, she was down to about 95 pounds or so. She had a 4-year-old daughter. Heartbreaking. And there was no question that she was dying. She had large lymphomas, you know, in various parts of her body, just below her brain, just below her heart. 2 terrible places to have them. And she said, Eric, I don't want to take these medicines anymore. They're just too, you know, they're poison. Even though they're supposed to be helping me, I actually feel worse. And, you know, cancer medicine can do that sometimes. And she was from Peru. And so I would get together with her and I would play for her. And she was so far gone. Like sometimes I would go there and she was barely even there. One time I went, she said, I don't think that I can do the session today because I have such a terrible headache that I haven't been able to think for 2 days. I said, well, why didn't you call me earlier? And I grabbed my tuning forks and I put the forks on her temples, you know, which is a spot that you use for headaches. And in 5 minutes, she was fast asleep. Great, right? Great. Well, now what do I do? Like I have an hour session and my client is fast asleep. So I created music for her, and I use a little recorder, and I record music. I give it to people, and they use it sort of like as an ongoing remedy. So so I created music for her, and sometimes I would sing, and I put my hand on her so she could feel the vibration of my voice. And then at the end of about an hour, I stopped and I put my stuff away and I left. And I closed the door, you know, and made sure she was covered. And she's probably sleeping for the first time in a couple of days. And I feel like I had really done a good job there, you know. A few hours later, she called me up. She's like, Eric, did you even come here today? You know, I was like, yeah, I'll send you the recording. And that's the kind of thing, like they don't know, you know, whether you did anything for them or not. That means you did a good job, you know. And, you know, and of course she passed, but I really feel like, you know, it was my first really successful, you know, client, one of my first successful clients. Yeah. Yeah, when I was there with her, I used my voice, and I played flutes, and I also played metal Tibetan singing bowls. You know, we all have our things that we like to use. You know, if she's Peruvian, then I'll play something that sounds to me like a mountain healing song from the mountain, like the sound of the mountain. You know, I had another client who was from Ireland, and she was dying, and she was the mother of a friend of mine, and I played music for her, and she went out, and when she came back, she was semi-conscious, and when she came back, I stopped playing, and she opened her eyes. She said, "Where did the people go?" And I said, "What people?" And she said, "The people that were on the side of the mountain near where we used to have the weddings in our village and the funerals." Right? The Peruvian woman, the dancer, sometimes I'd play for her and she would be, you know, in a semi-conscious state or an unconscious state, and she'd start singing songs from her childhood. No recollection. You know, so those are kind of amazing things that happen. I mean, not very amazing things happen too. You know, I'll tell you one other story. I had this woman who, she's a jazz singer. She's maybe about my age, but she looks a lot older. She's always tense, and I got to her house and she was on the phone. She said, "Eric, come in," and she's on the phone, and I can hear she's agitated, and she's talking to her banker, and she's just like, "I told you not to move this money today, to move it next week, and you just cost me $16,000." And she's like so really, really angry, and I'm sitting there thinking, how am I going to help this woman? She's just like a bag of cats who haven't killed anything today, and I try, and then she got off the phone and she explained to me that she's been in 3 accidents, 3 major accidents. She has all these screws in her back, and I can't do anything with vibration with her because I don't know if the vibration will take the screws out of her back. You know, I don't know, so it would be irresponsible for me to do it. So, you know, I'm trying to work around that. She's not calm enough for me to create music for her, and I was just getting used to these tuning forks. This is before this thing, no, not before this thing happened with my aunt, but it was soon after. And I'd never experienced the power of these 2 tuning forks. So I'm trying everything with her. Nothing's working. She's still all wound up. And she's laying on her couch. And I said, listen, while you're there, let me just try this. I don't even know what it does. I didn't say that, but I didn't know what it did. And I struck them and I put them next to her ears. And she was like, oh my God. And all of the tension left her face. And it was like she had a facelift. She looked 20 years younger. And I wanted to say to her, go look in the mirror. You're not going to believe this. But of course, like, she always sees herself looking like that, you know, so I can't. And then I couldn't wait to go to my next client because I was like, wait till I do this, you know, this is, you know. But you can't because you don't know how it's going to work out, you know. But, you know, these amazing things happen along the way, and then you start to realize this is way more powerful than even you think that it can be, you know. But yeah, I do try to tune in. I saw a whole bunch of clients one time. There's like this Irish woman and this Peruvian woman, and you know, and all these people. I'm creating music for them that sounds like their music, and then I record it and I give that to them. And then this guy comes in. He goes, "Well, this was a gift from the woman who set this whole thing up," and he's like a biker from Florida, and I can't figure out how to get. You know, he's like, "Oh, you play music, I play music. We should do something together." I was like, "Well, I'm kind of doing this on my own." You know, and we're talking. I'm trying to get something out of him so that I can create some music for him. And he tells me one thing that resonated with me. He said his father was a harmonica player that grew up in Alabama and would play on the radio when he was 11 years old. I said, well, what did he play? He played blues, he played bluegrass, he played, you know, folk music, you know. He said, yeah, a little bit of everything. I said, wow, that's really cool. And then I looked at him and I said, so what do you do for, you know, your spiritual moments? He goes, I'm Catholic. I was like, no, but what do you do? Like, what do you do, like, when you want to have peace? He goes, wind therapy. I was like, oh, wind therapy, that's really cool. Like, what does that mean to you? He says, you know, I get on my Harley and I ride. Which is legitimate, you know. So, you know, so then we're talking, and I'm remembering this thing about his dad, and I was like, you know what, I'd like to play some music for you. He's like, God, go ahead. You know, I mean, he's talk about like, you know, being able to help somebody bypass their belief system. There's no, you know, he has absolutely no confidence in this at all. He's just visiting, and he wants the jam with me, you know, which is not what we're here for. And so I take up my saxophone, and I play like gut bucket, barrel house blues for him. This guy is like I pulled a thorn out of his paw. He like emails me all the time saying, you know, what you did is incredible. You know, I don't believe it. Like I connected with my father's spirit. I haven't seen my father in 40 years. You know, it was really amazing. But that's the kind of thing. It's like part of it's intuitive, but you get there if you're really listening. So, you know, as a musician, you know, you develop your technique, you develop your everything that you know about being a musician, but then you just sit and you listen, and your moments come and your opportunities come, and then you create something, you know. So, with that, yeah, play my saxophone. Yeah, my older sister's telling me to play the saxophone. So is my mother. This isn't because I need it. In fact, Max, if you can turn this down in the house, it'd be great. Yeah, it's number 1, actually. Thank you. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I love that line. questions? Any more questions? I don't know it. No, I do know.
You're welcome to come and talk to Eric, and if you want to try some of these, we
Yeah.
can help you with that too.
Sure.
I can do that with you. While you're talking to him, I can do some of this.
Yeah.